listening to UFOsUpClose.com radio, and I am your host, Michelle McKay. Now, today's guest is David Haisell. That's spelled H-A-I, S as in Sam, E-L-L. And he's been a ufologist for quite a while, actually. Now, most of you know that my great-uncle was pioneer UFO investigator Henry McKay. He was an electrical engineer with the Air Force and was one of the first in the world to specialize in physical traces of UFOs. And he was also the very first director of MUFON in Canada. Now, in his files, he mentions the Jackson's Point incident, which he investigated, and that's the topic of today's broadcast. But there's a couple of different elements to this case that you need to know about first so you don't get confused. First off, we have the radio broadcast that aired back in the year 1973 on the CFGM radio station, which was hosted by Ron Knight. And during that 1973 broadcast, my great-uncle, Henry McKay, was being interviewed about UFOs when this man calls in saying that he is looking at a UFO in the sky right at that very moment in Jackson's Point, Ontario. Now, later in the interview, the radio station's phone lines jam, which forced the radio station to temporarily go off air. Somewhat similar to the infamous Art Bell Area 51 Frantic Caller episode, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. So when I heard the cassette tape of the radio broadcast from 1973, that's what it reminded me of. Now, this 1973 radio broadcast, I uploaded it to the UFOs Up Close YouTube channel, so you can listen to the full broadcast there. And if you're listening to me on YouTube right now, then I'll also post the link to the full 1973 radio broadcast in the description below. Okay, so, but right now, what I'll do is play a short 9-second clip from that 1973 tape of what it sounded like when the radio station went offline. Listen to this. And then it just continues to go on from there. Lots of other weird noises. Really freaky. You got to listen to the whole thing. But also during that broadcast, a male calls in, another male, not the same one, about the first male that I was talking about, different male. He calls in and he starts asking Uncle questions of a somewhat, in my opinion at least, of an eerie sort of nature. He sounded very ominous. Here, I have a 2.5 minute clip from that 1973 broadcast that I also want to play for you with this ominous sounding man, so you can hear what I'm talking about.
I'll say goodbye to you for the time being.
Mr. Knight?
Yes.
May I interject? Would you tell Mr. McKay to plan a visit to Jackson's Point at some time?
Are you on the same phone line as Mr. Scott?
Yes.
I see you've taken over from Mr. Scott.
Yes, this is the superintendent.
Oh, Jack, then you have observed the same things that Mr. Scott has just described to us.
Yes.
I see. And do you go along with what he said?
I've been a ufologist for 15 years.
I see.
I would like to speak to Mr. McKay.
All right, you're there, are you, Henry?
Yes, I am.
Would you go ahead?
Hello, Mr. McKay.
Hello.
How long have you been a ufologist?
Well, that's not the part right now. We're more interested in this actual sighting.
Yes, we are, Mr. McKay, aren't we?
Yes.
And, of course, we are interested, too, in your intellect in regards to these sightings and your comprehension of the totality of the analogy of ufology.
That's true.
Indeed. Let us judge ourselves carefully, Mr. McKay.
Jack, since it's Ron Knight again, since that's the only name we have for you, if you're going to go ahead and carry on this type of a discussion with Mr. McKay, I must step in and get your full name and address and so forth, since we have all that from Mr. McKay. Would you mind giving that to us?
I will get in touch with Mr. McKay in due future.
Well, you're on the air. Do you have any reason for not giving us your background, sir?
I have a very strong reason.
Oh, you have a strong reason. Well, it strikes me as very strange that you would, in a way, confront Mr. McKay with the statements you've just made without telling us who you are.
Okay.
I mean, you can't be just a voice in the night on CFGM. Do you doubt what Mr. McKay says or what's been quoted about him for some reason?
I underestimate his intellect.
You underestimate his intellect?
In regards to ufology, yes.
Uh-huh. You know very much about Mr. McKay?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Mr. McKay, do you know this man?
I doubt it.
You don't think you know him?
No, I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
Now, when I first heard this tape, just going through my uncle's files, and I listened to this tape, I hear this, weird noises from this radio station being taken down from what we suspect to be caused by a UFO, or who knows what was causing it. But and then I hear this man talking in that sort of manner to my uncle. Now, I really didn't know what to think of him. Who was he? Why was he asking Uncle these sorts of questions? And why with such an eerie sounding tone to his voice? So we have these bizarre sort of scenarios going on with that 1973 broadcast, which I asked David Haisell about during my Skype interview with him that I did with him on January 28th, 2015. So I will now play the Skype voice interview that I did with David. And just before I do, if anybody would like to reach David, he can be reached at the following email address: D as in David, AHAI, S as in Sam, at Rogers.com. That's DAHAIS at Rogers.com. So if you have a podcast, or you want to interview him at all, or if you have similar UFO experience, I don't know if he'll take those. I know he's pretty busy, but he's quite the affluent ufologist. So serious cases only. And he gets lots of emails, so he might not be able to respond to everybody's email. But if you need to reach him, that's how to reach him. And also, you can buy his book on Amazon.com or .ca or .uk, wherever. But you can buy his book on Amazon, which I highly, highly recommend. And his book is called A Question of Control. And this book includes all of the details of his investigations of the Jackson's Point incident and Gerry Armstrong, who was the abductee for his entire life. So what's Jackson's Point incident? Who's Gerry Armstrong? You're going to find out in a few minutes when you listen to this interview. And for more information beyond this interview, pick up the book, A Question of Control. So here is a Skype voice call that I did with David. I sound like I'm tippy-toeing.
Hello?
Hi, David. It's Michelle. How are you?
Hey, Michelle. I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome, awesome. Listen, I'm so excited to talk to you today. I've been really looking forward to this, so we'll just get right to it.
Sure.
Now, your book that you have out called A Question of Control, which can be purchased on Amazon. Now, that book features the Jackson's Point incident, which was one of my great uncle's investigations. And David, you took that case over, is that right?
Yeah, I heard about it regarding on a phone interview that Henry did, way back in, this was early 1973, I guess. Initially, a little bit of history on how I got to know Henry. I read an ad in the newspaper regarding a course that he was giving in the fall of 1973, and I was always interested in UFOs, so I signed up to take it. And he did a couple of phone-in interviews with radio stations that fall as well, and I happened to tape them. and one of them was interrupted by a strange signal, switchboard overload, we thought at the time. And nothing really came of that until early in 1977, where again I was listening to an interview on the radio with another UFO investigator. And coincidentally, he was talking about strange interferences that UFO investigators were starting to have. And he'd mentioned a call that he'd had with Henry, who told him about the program interference. And I suddenly remembered, I said, yeah, I've got a tape of that radio show. And I thought, well, maybe this interviewer or maybe this investigator would like to hear it as well. And that's sort of where the whole thing started to come together.
So you've been a ufologist for just a little over 40 years, is that right?
Long time. A long time.
You know, I must say, listening to the tape from 1973, and then again later when you were interviewed about it in 1978 with Ron Knight, you sound exactly the same.
Oh, thanks. I'll put you on my Christmas card list.
All right. So now, speaking of that broadcast, I want to ask you a couple of quick questions about the broadcast first, and then we'll get right into the details of your book. Now, Gerry Armstrong, who's the subject of your book, now that's not his real name, that's his alias, right?
Yeah, that's a pseudonym they wanted me to use.
Okay, and now did he ask you to not use his real name in the book, or?
Yeah, that's right. His family was involved in a pretty significant business in the area where they lived, and he rather we use a pseudonym for him.
Okay, because I noticed that he says his real name in the broadcast when Ron Knight interviewed him in 1973, and then obviously after that he changed his mind. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So, so now my big question is, in the 1973 broadcast, the one who was sort of challenging Uncle at first, that was Gerry Armstrong.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So now, here's the thing, is to me, because, you know, I mean, I just got Uncle's files about 4 years ago, and going through them, and every time I hear that broadcast, I think that he sounded so ominous, especially when he said, "We are interested in your intellect, and let's judge ourselves carefully, Mr. McKay." So my question to you, because you knew Gerry, you've interviewed him for quite a few years. Is this how he normally talked? Or I got asked, it sounds like he could have been in some sort of trance or something was talking through him.
Oh, no, not really.
No.
No, I think he was just a little bit, well, since he was on the radio, I think he was being very careful about what he said, I suppose.
Okay, so it was more from a serious type of questioning that he was asking Uncle. Because to me, of course, in my wild imagination, listening to this, not knowing anything really about the case, and when you listen to the tape, you almost think, oh wow, are the extraterrestrials talking through him, saying, you know, let's judge ourselves carefully, Mr. McKay? Like it just sounded ominous from an outsider who knows nothing about the case. So I wanted to ask that to you. So, okay, so that is really good information to know, because I've been wondering about that for so long. Now, getting into the book, A Question of Control, which is available on Amazon. Tell me about it. Let's get into the details. Tell me about this book and the whole case, because I know very little about it, just going from notes from Uncle.
Okay. Well, as I said, I originally started in 1977. It ended up really with me going up to Jackson's Point to interview the family. And they were a little bit dubious about being interviewed, because they said they'd been interviewed by so many people in the past, so many investigators, and they seemed to be, the investigators seemed to just like keep asking them questions, this, etc. And rather than letting them talk and try and explain what had happened to them and the way it affected them, personally, individually. They were more interested in talking about what it meant and how it affected them, rather than reporting, well, we saw this, it was 300 feet above the ground, and it was this color, and it was going in that direction. Rather than getting away, they wanted to get away from the technical aspects and sort of get into more the personal aspects. And I was quite willing to let them talk, and that's really what they appreciated. So throughout letting them talk, I learned a lot about their history, both in England and what happened in Canada. And eventually I suggested to them, well, this is very important stuff. It's significant in the whole field. Would you mind if I wrote a book about it? And they said, great, that would be great. So we spent about a year going back and forth, getting to know them, getting to know what had happened. And that eventually resulted in the first book, which was published in 1978, and that was called The Missing 7 Hours. And that sort of gave the background on the whole family. Now, the missing 7 hours happened to him when he was a child. He was 11 or 12 years old in England. And he didn't know what happened during that 7-hour period. And in fact, the reality of him being missing did not come back to him until he and his wife happened to be watching this strange phenomenon at night, which was a UFO of some kind. And then all of a sudden he remembered, hey, I had a missing 7-hour period when I was a little boy.
Now, the UFO, when you say the UFO, him and his wife saw at night, are you talking about at Jackson's Point?
No. This is still when they were in England.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just after they got married. They happened to be looking out of the window. I guess it was, I forget the details now, but they're in the book. It's been a long time since I got into the details.
Yeah, it's a big case.
They were looking out of the window, and they saw this strange light, and it suddenly started pulsating. And they watched it almost as if they were hypnotized. And that's when the memory came back to him that he'd been missing for 7 hours. So that's really what resulted in the book. He didn't know what happened during that 7-hour period, and he was a little bit reticent about finding out because of a lot of the other incidents that he'd heard and read about. And it wasn't until after the book was published that he suddenly decided, well, I can't live with not knowing anymore. And he agreed to see a hypnotherapist to get regressed to see if they could find out what happened in that 7-hour period. So as a result of 2 sessions, we found out more details about what happened. And that sort of resulted in me publishing a journal, which was published for 2 years, which reported the details of that.
What was that journal?
A lot of other things. It was called Journal UFO.
Okay.
And it became an international journal, and we published it for 2 years. And that contained the details of the regression, plus the analysis of the regression by the psychotherapist. And
can people, David, anyone listening, can they get copies of that UFO journal now? Is it somewhere online or no? Okay.
Oh no. This was before computers. This was way back in 1970, I guess 78, 79, 80, in that period. 81, I guess, was the last year that we published.
Okay. So so this is how he found other ufologists. All the ufologists you said that he was talking to. He went for he just started talking to them, trying to find out what happened, and then he just came across other ufologists and whatnot, I suppose, eh?
Sorry, I'm not clear on the question.
At the beginning, you said that when you approached them, they were saying that they've already spoken to other ufologists, and none of them wanted to really know what he personally went through. So I was wondering, how did he come into contact with these ufologists? So now I'm just assuming that night when they saw the UFO, he saw the UFO with his wife, and then he started looking into it, wanting to know what happened when he was a child. That's how he got contact with other ufologists?
Yeah, that's it. That's after they had that sighting in England, they called, I think it was before British UFO Research Association, and reported it, and then they got investigated by that, and then a few other investigators heard about it.
Bufora, right?
Bufora, yeah.
Bufora, okay, sorry, yep.
And the same thing happened here when they came to Canada. They talked to various people about what they were seeing, And as I said, he was frustrated by them not really wanting to know the impact on the family. And, it's justified, really, because this is something that started when he was 12 years old, and it sort of happened to them in England, and then it followed them over here when they moved. So it's sort of been a many-year phenomenon that they were involved with. And this is, a puzzle, really. Why us?
Right.
So that was really what he wanted to know and get into more detail, and rather than just reporting the specifics of a UFO incident.
So would it be correct to say that Gerry was an abductee or experiencer?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That came out in the regression sessions that he had with the hypnotherapist.
Wow. When I really feel for people who go through this, because I just couldn't imagine. To know that you're the one who's pegged, and especially when you move from one country to another, and it follows you. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you do? Who can you complain to? Who can you say, look, this has to stop? It's
that's true.
Fascinating. Now, one other question too is, so this the Missing 7 Hours. Now that book is out of print. However, with the book, A Question of Control, all the details from Missing 7 Hours is in that book that is now available on Amazon, called A Question of Control. So anyone who's listening, you don't need to go out to all these used bookstores like I did trying to find Missing 7 Hours. Just pick up A Question of Control on Amazon, and you're going to have all the details in there.
And it also includes the regression sessions and the analysis, and also a little bit more background on UFO history in Canada. So there's quite a lot more information in there.
Oh, awesome! So that's good book to pick up, because then you have it all. Now, did who validated his experience at 11 years old that he was missing 7 hours? With his parents, or like how when you're I'm just asking for anyone out there who's thinking, well, he was only 11 years old, how can he be sure he was missing for 7 hours, or have those 7 hours missing? Did the parents recollect this, or was there any other kind of documentation?
No, he was on a school trip, a school camp with his teachers. And they were the ones that noticed he was missing. And then they found him 7 hours later, and he didn't realize it had been 7 hours. He thought it was just, a few minutes.
Wow. Oh, wow. So this is very much documented. I mean, you have adults trying to find him at a camp, in a camping situation. And he thought it was just a couple minutes.
Yeah, it was around 2 o'clock, I think, in the afternoon, when he got separated from the rest of the students, because they were playing some sort of game. And he remembers he sat down under a tree, and it was broad daylight. And then the next thing he remembers, it was all dark around him. And he heard people running around saying, "He's here, sir. He's here, sir. We found him." And he couldn't understand what was going on.
Wow. So when he had his, so then you fast forward years later, he's married, he sees this pulsating object, and then that's when he remembers, oh, wait a second, I was missing for 7 hours at camp.
Yeah.
And then he went under the hypnotic regression and then started remembering things. Wow, that's amazing. Did he have any markings on his body, do you remember?
He had a red spot on the back of his neck. And that was basically it. Back of his neck was sore. And coincidentally, that has been reported in several other different UFO encounters as well.
Wow. What did he's passed away now, Gerry, I can assume, right?
Yeah, he passed away 4 years ago.
Okay. What did he think was, like, did he ever have some kind of reasoning as to why this was happening to him, or did he always just never really know the reason why?
Well, at the time, he didn't know why. When we published the book, he didn't know why. But what has happened since then, let me see, when was it? 1986, I believe. 1986, November. he had another encounter. And all of this happened after the book was published.
Now, are these the rings that you were saying that involved Unkelf? That have to do with the case?
I'm sorry.
I remember when I spoke to you, you said there's rings that involve Uncle from the 1980s. Is this what you're talking about?
No.
Okay, that's something different. Okay, so sorry. So yeah, continue
What?
From 86. You said or something.
Yeah, he. I'm just trying to find the date. It was November the 7th, 1986. It was about 9:30 in the evening, and he suddenly noticed the lights in the house were flashing on and off, and he realized something's happening. So he went to the back door and stepped out into his backyard, and that's when he saw the UFO. It landed in his backyard.
Landed in his backyard, and was this in Jackson's Point?
Yep.
So 1973, him and he's at the seniors lodge with another senior, and a bunch of them are looking at some kind of object in the sky in 1973, and they call into the Ron Knight show and start reporting it. And then in 1986, did you say November 86?
Yeah, November 1986, and all of this happened, following the whole investigation and the completion of the investigation. This is news that I have recently come across. So as a result of that sighting and some of the things that he found out during that encounter, I'm working on another book now to go into the details of that.
Oh, well, we can't wait till that book comes out. So we need to get A Question of Control. Let's all get that on Amazon. And then we'll anxiously anticipate when the next book comes out. This is amazing. Wow. When do you think the next book will be ready?
I'm guessing in about a year.
A year. Okay. So
yeah.
we'll have you back again in a year. But that's amazing.
This is where, I know you mentioned rings a few minutes ago. I was a little bit confused, but I think when I talked to you earlier on about this, I mentioned that there was something in his latest encounter that would relate in a way to some of the areas that you're very interested in.
Okay.
Which I know is ghosts, haunting, etc.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yep.
That's another of your interests.
Yes.
Well, one of the things that he was told or informed about in this latest encounter was several rings or layers, I guess is a better word to describe it, that sort of surround the globe, surround Earth. And this, in a way, relates to the whole concept of reincarnation. So it ties in with that. Now, if you've got a couple of minutes, I can give you a little bit more details on. Yeah,
we have 20 minutes. We have 20 minutes, so let's go. Let's get in it.
Okay, well, he was told, and there's a lot more details involved in this, obviously, but he was told that there are 7 layers of soul consciousness, if that's what you want to refer it to, surrounding the globe. And the closest layer to the globe consists of souls who have not had a very positive experience on Earth in their life. And it's a very dark area. And these kind of souls apparently are related to what you may have run into in the way of ghosts. And they go through various levels as they progress from the Earth. I'm just trying to find the section in the book here now that I have in front of me that refers to it.
Take your time, no problem.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. This first ring then, and I'm quoting from what he was apparently told by the entity that he met with in the UFO in this last encounter. The first ring contains the souls of entities such as murderers and rapists and people that had a rough life. And they don't know that they are discarnate or dead, as we as humans refer to it. And they're wandering around in a constant state of ignorance upon the surface of the planet, trying desperately to participate in human physical affairs, but to no avail. And these forms take on their last physical appearance in their dark gray, and their environment is a very ugly, mist-filled place. And they're trying to involve themselves into the physical reality of Earth and continue in their old ways, trying to harm each other, etc. And in this essence, they rarely get past this first layer. They usually end up finishing by reincarnating back to Earth to conduct another physical lifetime of ignorance. And apparently it takes thousands of years for them to get out of this. This again ties in with the whole concept of reincarnation. Those that are in the second layer are not much better. They still cling to the last image of themselves. And they're just as ignorant of the fact that they're deceased, apparently. Their hatred is not as predominant as those that are in the first layer, but they're still very confused, and they're wandering around aimlessly trying to involve themselves with what's going on and not being able to do it. The third layer apparently is the beginning of the awakening process. And here they also get help from those that are in the fourth layer. And this is where the layers begin to interact. Those in the third layer apparently realize that they're dead, but they're still confused that life apparently still goes on for them. They didn't really expect what's happening to them. The fourth layer are more average humans apparently go to the fourth layer when they leave their life here. And they're greeted apparently by former friends and so-called relatives who initiate them into the new reality. At least it's new for them at the time. They're trying to help those apparently in the lower levels as well. When they get to the fifth ring, those who reincarnate to the fifth ring, they're losing many of their human ideas and form, and apparently what they call their inner light is beginning to manifest itself. And they spend time reaching out to try and help those that are in the fourth ring. And the next ring, apparently, he says, or they told him, is very abstract and it's hard to explain. But when you get to the seventh ring, this is where the souls realize what everything is all about, and they're ready then to depart and into another life. So it's the reason I wanted to mention this to you is because of your involvement with ghosts and haunting, and maybe there's a relationship between what he was told about these various layers and what you and other people who have experienced ghosts are involved with. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, definitely. Yes. As you're talking, I'm just thinking of all these different reports that are popping into my head that correlate to what you're saying. Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'll put part of this broadcast here onto coldspot.org radio as well, so that way the ghost enthusiasts can hear that portion of it. Yeah, definitely. The first layer that you were talking, I think it was layer 1, about the gray entities. It makes me think of what we call shadow forms, shadow figures. But I mean, to me, there's a whole all these different theories about shadow forms, and some people say that, or believe that shadow forms are evil and whatnot. But to me, I just think, shadow forms could just be anything. It's not necessarily evil or good. It's just how that particular spirit is manifesting. However, when you talk about the gray entities, that's what I think of is the shadow forms. So that could be what's happening there. And then as far as the realms, I'm thinking, or the layers, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking realms, maybe, like different dimensions that are kind of on top of each other. No, at first when you said around the globe, I was thinking ley lines, but then as you kept talking, I thought, okay, those aren't ley lines. It's just more like spirit worlds, different layers of spirit worlds that are kind of, they all coexist. But they're kind of like on top of each other. I mean, as the theory goes anyways, that's how I visualize it. So to have these 7 different layers, I know there's, It also reminds me of, there was this other dude, and I believe he's dead now. His name was Don Juan or something like that, and he was he got a lot of information through some Aboriginal elders. I think it was in California or Mexico. I'm sure some of the listeners probably know who I'm talking about, and I'm almost sure he wrote too about the different layers, and it kind of reminds me of that as well. It's really fascinating though. So Gerry, so this object lands in Gerry's backyard in the 80s, and then an entity comes out and tells him about
But he was
ghosts.
actually taken on. He was taken on board. He went on board. They didn't come out, and that's where he looked into this sphere that they had and found out a lot more about his history. And that's when he explained all of this to him. And apparently, he was also given a little direction as to what he was supposed to do. What was all happening to him was that he was supposed to start writing about all of this and help inform humanity about what everything was all about. So that was his purpose. After all these years, he finally found out why he had been contacted.
Like they knew that, yeah, that makes sense, because like I think I was so happy to see that you wrote a question of control, because for the last 4 years since I saw it written, like getting Uncle's files and finding out about the missing 7 hours, I've been trying to find it, and I just can't find it anywhere in any of the used bookshops. I found it once, and then it went really quick. So I was really, really happy to find out that you did a question of control, because, that's the thing, is we can put stuff up on websites, but websites, they come and go. Eventually over time, the owner of the website, they pass away, and if the website someone has to pay for the website to keep it going. If no one's paying for it, the website's taken down, and that information is gone. So I'm still a huge advocate of the written word, of it, get it into a book, because it continues along, even when the author passes away, sometimes the publisher keeps it going, especially if it's, as if it sells well, but the word gets out better. So I was so happy to hear that you did a question of control, really happy to hear another one's coming out, because this is such a fascinating case. It really, it has to be documented properly. To me, it's right up there with the Betty and Barney Hill case, I'm going to promote this book as much as possible for you, because like this is such a fascinating case. It really is, to just be continually, and what I love about it too is, it goes from one country to another, from England and from Canada, sort of similar like the Betty and Barney Hill. I think Betty experienced some stuff up in Canada too, or on her way back from Canada or something like that, is in Uncle's notes. But anyways, so yeah, I think, and here's my question is, for whoever it is, well, we'll just call them extraterrestrials for argument's sake, because we don't have really any other name for them, I guess, except for occupants or whatever, but entities, I guess, right? These entities that took him aboard, and were giving him the information. Now, they want him to tell the information to the world. And is that, like, what would be what do you think would be the purpose of that? Is that to get mankind to not be so freaked out about them?
Yeah, also to enlighten them about what mankind's presence and future is all about, I suppose.
Because when I'm just getting into ufology ever since I got my uncle's files. He always wanted me to get into it when he was alive, and I never did, because quite frankly, I was always afraid of being abducted, just petrified of it. So I figured, if I don't put myself under the big spotlight of the UFO out in the field, then, I don't have to worry about it. I could just continue with my ghosts, and then I just would hear all the stories from Uncle. But when I got all his files, reading through his files, it just sucks you in. I mean, these cases are just amazing, and then you want to know more. That natural curiosity takes out in you, and you just want to know more. So now I'm slowly getting into it. So I just reading through all these cases, and I think to myself, why wouldn't they? How do I say? Okay, spit it out, Michelle. What I'm trying to say is, when they a lot of people question, well, if quote unquote aliens are really here, why don't they just land in the White House and say, ta-da, here we are, and go on CNN and whatever. But obviously they're not doing that. And it seems like from a lot of the cases, they kind of try to hide what they're doing. If a bunch of people kind of show up, they do try to sort of get away, or they'll just abduct you, or use telepathy to try to sort of say this is not what you're seeing, or whatever. Just even the whole bit about how experiences or abductees will not remember anything, so it's like their brains kind of being zapped from that memory. So to me, that kind of tells me, well, maybe they don't really, it's like they're doing this stuff sort of in secret. They don't want to really just come right out and to the television cameras and be like, here we are. So we don't know. The question is to why they're even here. So I just find it fascinating that from what you're saying, and Gerry's information that he gathered from them was to, they just want to sort of enlighten mankind, and maybe that's what they're doing, is just kind of running experiments on us sometimes, and just trying not to be seen.
Yeah, it's a long-term phenomenon. I mean, when you do your research and go back, you find out that it's not something that's prevalent only in the last 50, 60 years. Dr. Jacques Vallée, who is a very well-known researcher, he's an astronomer and astrophysicist as well. He's done a lot of research going back 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 years, and found that the phenomenon has been around for a long, long time. So it's been interacting with man in many different ways for many centuries. So you have to put what Gerry experienced within the context of the whole long-term phenomenon, which makes it a lot more complex in trying to figure out exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any theories as to what they are?
No, I don't.
No.
It's too early to try and draw any conclusions. The only thing that you can say for sure is that there is another consciousness that's interacting with man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I guess that's why I do what I do and you do what you do, right? We're still at it. We're still at it, trying to figure out what's going on here. We still don't have the answers, David.
It's a challenge, but it's an interesting one. You have to keep an open mind.
You really do, and it's so the mind just boggles the mind, and then you hear all these stories, and you're like, well, what the heck is that all about? And I remember Uncle several different times, even to the media, when he started out in ufology in 1965. His whole goal was, well, I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to prove that all of this is nonsense, pretty much, right? There's got to be an explanation. Well, 80 years old, when he passed away, he still didn't have it proven. He thought for sure we're going to end this business. What's this UFO business? There's something going on. So,
yeah, there's so much that we don't know.
No.
I mean, even this ties in now with what's being done in quantum research right now in cosmology. They're beginning to realize that what we see as matter, what makes up all our elements, that makes up everything physical that we see, now only constitutes about 4% of the universe. The other 96% is made up of what they're now calling dark matter, dark energy, about which we know next to nothing. So this whole thing may be tied in with the other 96% of the universe. And we're just starting now to get familiar with, hey, there's something out there. There's a lot out there that we don't know anything about, so we better start doing some research.
Yeah, so true. So true. My whole thing growing up, I always wanted to be an archaeologist. I'm just obsessed with prehistoric archaeology. And, I've spent summers with archaeologists and I read these archaeological dissertations. But anyways, in my armchair studying of archaeology, I back in the time, they would call things, oh, this is the occult back then. And nowadays it's science. Mm-hmm. if they saw electricity happening in motion back then, it would be, oh, this is, the Satan's work, or this is the occult. And nowadays it's just science. So, could you imagine, obviously we don't know everything right now, because in 400 or 500 years from now, the science in 400 or 500 years from now will look at today and say, boy, they were like cavemen. They were so like antiques, So, for us to think that, number one, for us to think that we're all alone is kind of ridiculous, with all the billions of stars out there. But, and then that's the thing is are they, travelers, traveling around, or, maybe they are, maybe it is interdimensional, maybe it is all interdimensional. And I know with what we were talking about, with the string theory, they were saying about, I think they're mentioning that they're suspecting that there could be 22 dimensions and even more. And I'm finding it really cool that more and more mainstream scientists are actually starting to accept the whole string theory.
Oh yeah.
It's just, it's like, it takes time, right? For something to go from a theory to a law, I guess it takes many years. So, eventually, one day all of this will be proven, and then you'll have to have some kind of scientific degree to do what I do and do what you do. Step aside, we know what we're doing. So it's really fascinating. And what I really find fascinating, though, getting back to the Gerry Armstrong case, is when the object landed and then he was taken aboard, what I find fascinating is you said he was looking into a sphere.
Yeah, they had a sphere of a 2-foot diameter sphere, which is, I guess we would relate to what we call a television. And in that sphere, he saw his whole past life. And this is where he learned all about the layers as well, and what happened to him.
Wow. So the entities that took him aboard, they felt that it was necessary for him to know about mankind.
Yeah. This is really following up on what he was told way back when he was 12, because from the regression sessions, I can't remember the exact words, but they said they would be visiting him again. They would be in touch again later.
Wow.
And I suppose this was a result of that.
So you have quote unquote aliens, or whatever we want to call them, entities. We're assuming they're extraterrestrial, and their concern is to teach Gerry about mankind, about a totally different species, if they even are a totally different species. That, to me, that's just mind-boggling, because some say that maybe the extraterrestrials are mankind that have gone into the future, and now they're coming back into time, and this is kind of like the suits they're wearing that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a whole nother concept, though.
I know.
Time travel, that boggles the mind.
It's just, we're not going to solve, David, we're not going to solve the whole UFO case in like 20 minutes, right? I wish we could, but, it's just, wow, that just, just what that says, like not only what he went through, but just what that says is how you have what we suspect to be extraterrestrials, and their concern is not their own species or not helping their species, but their concern is coming down here, bringing Gerry Armstrong aboard of the ship to tell them about our species and the history of our species. Like, if that's, it's just, that really says a lot right there about possibly their intent. Possibly, this is all hypothetical speaking, right? If we're assuming that they are extraterrestrials and whatnot, but wow. This is amazing. So, really interesting. So you're working on this other book, and that's going to come out in about a year. So anyone listening, I'm speaking with David Haisell. I pronounced that right? It's Haisell, not Hassel?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, Haisell, yeah.
And it's Haisell. And if you want to reach him, if you want to interview him or have any information for him, you can reach him at the following email address. That's D as in David, AHAI, S as in Sam, E, at Rogers.com. That's DAH. AISE at Rogers.com.
No, AIS, there's no E.
Oh, there's no E, sorry. I'm looking at the at. Okay, so no E. So scratch that. DAHAIS at rogers.com. So you can reach him there. And make sure you go out right now and get his book, Question of Control, at Amazon, and order that. And you're going to get all the details of everything we've been talking about tonight. You'll read about Gerry Armstrong and what happened to him when he was younger. And well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, David.
Well, thank you, Michelle. You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
It has been, and we'll keep in touch. It's amazing, going through Uncle's files and seeing all these names, and I'm reading about these cases and the names and everything, and now I'm slowly starting to talk to everybody. It's like his files are like coming alive, So you were on my list to speak with. So I was really, really excited to talk to you about all these things today.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so we'll be in touch and we'll have you on again. That'll be it for today. And you have an awesome day.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and you too.
Thanks.
Best of luck with what you're doing.
Thank you. Take care. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.